Thank you so much. We now have the Honorable Patricia Martin present, and I'm told that you wanted to introduce yourself. So just grab the microphone right there.
First of all, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to be here. I guess I should start by saying thank you to Congress for allowing us the opportunity and the privilege to be here this morning. But I think the thing that is impressing me so much sitting here is seeing all the young faces. So before I say anything else, give yourselves a hand. I never waste the opportunity to congratulate young people. One of the things I do, I am the presiding judge of the Child Protection Division in Cook County, Chicago, Illinois. And I will tell you, I've been in that position as presiding judge for the last 15 years. And I am embarrassed to tell you one of the lessons I learned, one of the first lessons I learned, was that my young people can make it. And what I went into that court saying to my chief judge, then chief, was I was going to work myself out of a job. Well, I haven't been successful in that, but we have reduced our numbers just like LA, substantially with Judge Nash, working with the National Council and doing a lot of work with a lot of my friends around the nation. But more importantly than reducing my numbers, I am committed to making the welfare of my children, the well-being of my children better. Because if I don't do that, when they leave my court, they don't have the tools, the foundational tools they need to become successful members of our society. Now, young ladies, I understand you guys are well on your way, and you've got it all together, right? But I am a past president of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. I also have the privilege of currently sitting on the President's Commission to eliminate child abuse and neglect fatalities. And so I've been doing a lot of work here in DC, talking to a lot of different organizations about my kids nationwide and what's going on with their lives and why am I losing so many of them when we're working so hard to save them. I have to tell you one story about one young lady in court, and then I will get on to the business of what I'm here for. I had the privilege of going and sitting down, and it truly was a privilege to sit down with a group of girls who were currently incarcerated. And I happened to be there on one of the days that they had a group therapy session. And I think more than anything else, this impressed upon me what my girls need, so many of my girls need, is an opportunity to rebuild their self-esteem. I think, in just generic terms, you have to feel good about yourself to do good. And if you don't, it's very hard to see a future. And that's what I need my kids to see, because when you come into my courtroom, most of my kids have a very flat affect. Do you know what I mean by that? Their eyes look very plain, very dark. And when I know I'm doing a good job, that's when I see the brightness. And that's when I get happy. But these girls were sitting around a table, and each one of them had a piece of legal paper, and that was representing their total soul. And what they did was took turns around the table and talked about things that hurt their soul. So when your mother yelled at you, did that hurt your soul, and how much of your soul? There were only 8 girls around the table. By the time they got to the 8th girl, no one had a piece of paper. Now that's tragic, and I don't want to minimize the tragedy of that, but let's talk about the rebuilding of that, right? Let's talk about what we can do to help and lift our girls so they can understand who they are and what they can be. That's the excitement in the world, right? That's where we need to be. So what I'd like to do is tell you a couple things about my court. Before, in the 1990s, my court was similar to a lot of courts across the nation. Judges didn't want to come to juvenile court. It was the punishment ground. If you did something wrong, you got a reversal on a big case, they sent you to juvenile court. So every time someone says, Judge, I'm not sure if you can do that, I say, what can they do? Send me to juvenile court? But now I have a waiting list of judges trying to get into juvenile court. I wish I could say that's because of me and my dynamic personality. You know, when you get a robe, you're the best thing ever, right? You're the smartest thing, the prettiest thing, the greatest thing. Funniest thing. But it's not my personality. The issue is you have to make certain that we can find a path to give our kids tools. And you can start seeing success, and that's why you want to come to juvenile court. Because if you ever have a chance to help someone change their life, get on a better path, it's at juvenile court. It's not criminal court when you're facing death row, right? And that does not mean people are not rehabilitative. I'm a former public defender, I know that. But what I'm talking about are kids who really, think about this, there's no one else in our judicial system who's completely innocent but my kids. The only thing they've done is be born to a particular set of parents who are being idiots at the time. And that doesn't mean they're idiots all the time. That means they're being idiots about my kids at that time, right? And so when I talk to judges, I ask for a 3-year commitment, so they are not allowed to come to my division, and I will not recruit them unless they're willing to give me 3 years. I want continuity. I want my judges to say Sally Sue, not minor one, right? I want my judges to know Sally Sue wants to be another story, and then I really will keep going. I have a benchmark hearing that's only designed for adolescents. They're scheduled at 2-hour intervals with one judge. And the idea is the youth tells me what they want, what they need. So they fill out some forms so I know what I know kind of and have some idea of what we're talking about. Well, one young lady came, now I live in Chicago. They have the Hawk in Chicago. Do you know what the Hawk is? That's that wind cutting into you on Michigan Avenue, okay? This young lady came in with a jumper, no tights, no hose, and cut-out shoes in February. Now, you know it's cold in Chicago, right? And so that's the first thing I was concerned about. But then the worker handed me her paperwork that said she wanted to be a cosmetologist. And so you know me. I said, sweetheart, you have to hurry up and get out. I'm getting gray hair. You have to help me figure out what to do, you know, and all. She goes, Judge, I don't even like doing my own hair. I said, well, then cosmetology also deals with makeup and all. She says, Judge, I hate all that stuff. And I said, well, then help me understand why all your paperwork says cosmetology. So the worker said to me, Judge, can we speak out of the presence of the minor? I said, no, this is her hearing. It's not your hearing, it's her hearing. No, we can't speak out of her presence. Well, ultimately, he convinced me to ask the young lady to go to another room. So I took her to my chambers, I gave her a Coca-Cola and some, put her on my computer. I went back to the courtroom, and this worker had the unmitigated gall to tell me, of all people, right, that I didn't think she could be a lawyer, and that's what she really wants to do. So I told her she had to, I said, wait a minute. Can I tell you how many lawyers don't need to be lawyers that I know? No. No, I'm joking about that. But the point is, if my child wants to be a lawyer, it's my responsibility to find the tutors she needs, get her in and out of high school, in and out of college, and in law school, and walk her to her first job interview. And then if she fails, go to the next one. And if she fails there, we can talk about something else, okay? But we can't shortcut her dreams simply because my perception is that she can't do it. Come on, folks, right? Come on. They're telling me already I have to close down, but there's one other point I want to make to you, and that is courts need to pay attention to my kids. I can't make a decision every kid wants all the time. But if I'm smart enough, if I listen hard enough, I can include what my kids want in what their decisions are. Now, when I talk about safety and permanency, I tell every kid I talk with, you can tell me what you want, I'll listen to you, but I will make a decision that I think is best for you. However, when my kids become young adults, and I'm not saying that their brain development is such that they should be held accountable for everything they do, but they should have an input into what's going on in their lives. How many of us grew up and our parents never said, what did you want to do? Come on, that's not going to work. So I need my kids to be invested in their lives. I need them to understand and take a hold of their lives. I need them to see a future in their lives, okay? So I want to first thank you so very, very much for being just you, okay? And I want to encourage each and every one of us to talk to our legislators. I want to see you here on the Hill. I want people to be bothered by us. I want people to say, golly, why don't they go home already? But they need to understand, and we come up here all the time talking about funding, and that's funding's necessary. Don't misunderstand me. But what's more necessary is opportunities to listen to our children. I know everybody tells me, Judge, don't call me a child. Opportunities to listen to our adolescents and make certain that their lives look like what they need their lives to look like, as opposed to what I want their lives to look like. I'll tell you one other story and then I'm done. I have one young lady. First of all, you guys are not very good friends. You failed to tell me that you never give a teenager your cell phone number. So I have this young lady calling me at 2 in the morning about her boyfriend didn't say hello, or, you know, anything. And so she got pregnant. And she said, Pat, I stayed away from you because I knew you would be disappointed. And of course I'm disappointed. I wanted her to go to nursing school. I had this all worked out. Of course, I had it all worked out. And I took her to dinner, and I was trying to talk with her and find out what she's going to do now. And she said, Pat, I'm already a success. You don't get that. And I said, well, explain to me what that is. And she said, at my age, my mother already had 2 children. I postponed it, and this is my first. And I said, you know what, son of a beehive, you're absolutely right. It's not what I want for you, it's what you want for you. And my responsibility, the adult in your life, is to help you shine your star so that you can shine bright and reach your goals. So ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you so very, very much for allowing me the opportunity.
Sonia, I know you wanted to talk a little bit more about trauma-informed care. Tell us, what is it girls need?
The theme here seems to be listening to young people. When I was 7 years old, as I said earlier, my siblings and I were placed into all different foster homes. What was good about my situation is that I was appointed a family attorney. And that family attorney asked me one day to write a letter. And he wanted that letter to tell the court whether or not I wanted to return home to my biological mom. And I knew this was important. I can remember at that young age grabbing my Webster dictionary saying I need to put some big words in here because this is going to the court. This is important. I need this to sound right. It was important. It's important to know that my attorney still supports me to this day. He mentioned that when he received that letter from me, it was then that he knew that I had potential and that I was going to do something positive with my life. It was even more important for me because that was the first time someone actually asked me what I wanted. Someone said, hey, what do you want to do? Had the court decided for me, I would have been back with my biological mom in a family where I am the only person who graduated from high school. I am the only person who went to college and went to grad school, still to this day. And for a long while, that was the only time someone ever asked me what I wanted to do with my life. I was initially happy to be in foster care. I had food, I had a place to live, but when my siblings and I were separated, my older sister began to run away. She was like my mother, so I wanted to run away to be with her. When she started running away, I ran away. I was placed in 7 different foster homes and attended 10 different schools over those years. I was expelled from 3 of those schools, and I also had a tough time with girls in the neighborhood. At age 13, I was arrested at school in front of all my peers and taken to the Youth Study Center, which is a children's jail, essentially, with bars, just like an adult facility. The one thing that stood out about my experience in youth study is that when I got there, I was strip searched. And 13-year-olds are extremely body conscious. So I was reluctant to even take off my clothing. And when the female guard said, if you don't hurry up and undress, we're gonna get a male guard in here to make sure you do it, I complied. And had I not complied, I'm not sure if she would have actually followed through with that, but that was enough to threaten my body conscious 13-year-old self to go along with what she said. Unfortunately, that wasn't the last time that I was involved with the justice system. At 16, I was placed in a Boys Town emergency shelter, and I currently work for Boys Town, and this is no plug, but I think Boys Town is a great organization. I tried to adjust to the family style environment in Boys Town, but because I was so accustomed to running away and doing whatever it was that I wanted to do, I ran away from Boys Town as well. But I was returned to Boys Town sometime later. And when I returned to Boys Town, once again, my social workers did not listen to me, because I had decided at that point, I don't want to run away anymore. I'm comfortable here. I want to stay here. But my social worker made her case plan and said, we're going to move her away from Boys Town. So at that point, I was settled. I was ready to stay. So she moved me hundreds of miles away to another group home, and this was at 16, and I hitchhiked my way back to New Orleans, Louisiana, from hundreds of miles away. I contacted my attorney, who was there to support me, and I said, hey, I don't want to run away again. I want to stay with my friend. My friend's mom was going to actively work to become my foster parent. My attorney said, okay, well, what would it take? Once again, what would it take for you to become successful? I said, well, I can't go to public schools because I keep fighting and I keep getting expelled and I keep getting in trouble. Can you help me? He said, yeah, we'll pay for you to go to private school. So he and his wife decided to pay for me to go and get a private education out of the kindness of their heart. And at 17, I was doing well academically. I was getting ready to graduate, and I actually received some scholarships from high school, which is really unheard of in my family. Some of them couldn't even explain what a scholarship was, and I was receiving one. And at that point, I was on track getting ready to graduate with some of my new friends from my new school. We were riding around in one of my friend's car, and during a routine traffic stop, we were pulled over, and the cop asked for everyone's state ID, and I gave him my ID because I wasn't doing anything wrong, and I was pretty good. So I was arrested because of a warrant that was never quashed and was never removed from running away from years before. In the middle of SAT testing, in the middle of me trying to complete my education, I was arrested for 4 days. The interesting thing about that is there was no due process. I was arrested for a crime, a juvenile crime, and sent to an adult correctional facility, Orleans Parish Prison, and stayed there for 4 days, and no one checked on me. So I called my friend's mom and said, hey, can you please reach out to someone? I'm going to fail my test. I was really worried about school. I'm going to fail my tests if someone doesn't come to get me from here. So my friend's mom reached out to my attorney, who contacted the judge at her house at night. And she made a call, and then I was released that same night. I was released back to my friend. It was never a formal foster care placement, so technically I should have still been on runaway. But nothing changed. It's still on my record to this day. That's still on my arrest record. It was never removed. People can search it, and it could possibly prevent me from getting employment if the question is, have you been arrested? Ultimately, I made it through because I had support. My support never came through permanency in the sense of a family. My permanency came through a group of a support of people in different systems who became personally invested in me, in my life, who decided, we want to pay for you to go to school. We're going to support you through whatever. And when I failed in college and I couldn't get financial aid, my family court attorney said, hey, I'm going to cover this semester of school because we want you to succeed that badly. So I had people who were in my corner regardless of all the expulsions and the arrests and all the bad behaviors. Some people didn't look at me as a statistic that was just doomed for failure. Instead, they looked at me as an opportunity youth, as opposed to a troubled youth.
Shay, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about opportunities for girls, or what opportunities should girls have in the juvenile justice system to be advocates for themselves? What opportunities at different stages for your voices to be heard?
First, I think that we don't even know about the opportunities to begin with. like I said, I started out in alternative school, and then I went to juvenile hall. I got my GED and passed the high school exit exam. And then when I was released, I enrolled into a community college. But I can't say that I really knew that those are the steps I was supposed to take to better myself. I had like a support system also. I think we need to be validated in ways that we're not being validated. You know, when I was in school, my teachers, they would affirm that I was smart, you know, but I had a lot of behavioral issues that I couldn't get past, and issues with self-love. And so the issues that I had with myself always superseded my intelligence in a way. And so I think we have to first let the young girls know what opportunities are out there for them. And in a lot of ways, we need to validate them and make us feel like we're valuable to different spaces.
Do you think it's different for girls than boys in society in terms of feeling validated?
I absolutely think so. You know, I had a really, I mean, I have to keep going back to my case because I don't feel like my circumstances were that unique. I think they're very common in my community. And most young girls in my community are mothers, very young mothers, and most of them experienced a lot of the same issues that I experienced. You know, they have sexual abuse, they have physical abuse, and a lot of times they can't really see themselves outside of that circumstance. And so we need to be exposed to different things. We need to be understood and seen in a different light. And people have to understand that there is a capacity for redemption there. And so once we're able to step into that space, I think that a lot of progress is underway.
Said just like a lawyer. Okay, Haley, I'm going to move to you, and if you could tell me a little bit about your experience in court and how you think it could have been a better experience and had more opportunities to let the judge know what was going on.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I never got asked any questions about who I was. I never even heard the judge ever say my name. I was just a case number. And so when I would sit there, you go in and you sit there until they say your name or say your number, and you go up. And they sit there and you don't talk at all as a child, honestly. You get a lawyer that doesn't know you. I didn't even talk to the lawyer that was given to me, ever. Personally, not before the trial, nothing. I walked up there and I just met someone right there. They sat there and told me who I was and what was going to happen to me and what happened, you know, why I got to that place and everything like that. I never actually got to speak for myself. I never got to say what I was feeling, why I even did it, nothing. I just sat there and they just did what they did. The judge never asked me anything. Like, I can't really express that anymore. That, I mean, I'm a person and I might not be an adult, and I don't know why, but people somehow think that because I'm a child, like I can't speak for myself, and that somehow magically when I turn 18, that's when I'm gonna be able to have a voice. And so I never got that. So my mom would go up there with me sometimes. She didn't attend all of them. And so they would ask her what I was feeling. Like, oh, what's wrong with Haley? Like, I'm standing right here, you could have asked me too. And so that really frustrated me. And so my first encounter with a judge, I did try to speak, but I got told to be quiet. And so, because I was talking out of terms and I never even got a chance to talk. And so after that, I just pretty much just stood there, and even if I didn't agree with what they were saying, and maybe what they were saying was completely wrong, I didn't really have a voice. I felt like that's the only thing, like I couldn't say anything, I couldn't change anything because I was a child.
Okay, we're going to move on to questions from the audience now. Chris, did you just want people to raise hands, or? Okay. Raise your hand, and there's a question over here to my right.
Can I speak? So I think first, the cases have to be evaluated differently, you know, and similar to what she says, there needs to be a more extensive, first we want to say on a cultural basis, like I just said, we have to see them in a different light. But as far as policymakers and service providers, you know, from an administrative angle, I think we have to seek approaches that are gender responsive and, like you said, trauma informed. We are recognizing the backgrounds and the characteristics unique to women, and strongly emphasizing the understanding that women experience who are incarcerated. And this recognition tells us that we are, you know, we are trying to get to the root of the issue to seek more effective solutions. Yeah.
Anybody else on the panel want to?
I think the first step to any type of change would probably be to ask. Like, that's just the number one thing. It's pretty basic. We don't need $1 billion program to do that. Just ask me what's wrong. Just ask. I mean, just because I'm a child doesn't mean I can't say what's wrong with me. I might not use big words or anything like that, but just ask, like, honestly. Like, that's just the bottom line. Just ask.
Sonia, did you want to add something?
I was actually going to agree with Haley. Just ask youth. Have young people involved in the decision making that impacts them. As I said, as a young child, I was able to determine that I was leaving an unsafe situation and being put in a safe situation. So just ask.
And I think that means that when you vote, and when you talk to those people that make decisions about who's going to be a judicial officer, I laughed when Pat said she has some of her kids, like I have of my kids, have my cell phone number. But you have to want to do this work. You have to believe in this work. You have to believe in what you're doing. And you cannot be better than or holier than or smarter than, because like you said, if you don't ask and you don't take the time, you really aren't fulfilling your judicial obligation to make the best decisions. So part of that falls on your community, educating your friends, your family, being educated about who you vote for if you're in a jurisdiction where you vote for judicial officers, because there is no higher calling than working with youth, as far as I know.
I think the young people answered the question well and fully, but I'd like to just add, in addition to trauma-based practices, I think we also really have to just look at people as individuals. You know, systems and bureaucracies are famous for having forms, so we can check everything off of a box that someone did something. And that doesn't necessarily tell me what Johnny Jones needs in 8th grade, right? And so I think in addition to looking at looking at trauma-based practices, two things. We need to know who our kids and families are. And secondly, we no longer, as a community, a child welfare, juvenile justice community, can afford to do what makes me feel good. I have to do what works well for my kids and my families. Historically, this is the only community I know, cottage industry as some would refer to it, that is based on what I feel. I'm going to do this because it makes me feel like I'm helping someone. So I think we really have to start, our children and families deserve to have the best practices. And no longer can we afford to just throw anything at them and say, oh, that's good enough.
And I think when we're looking for funding, we want to spend our money wisely, and the only way that we can truly determine whether the money is being spent wisely is to have data that reflects the results that we're looking for. And I think that that's something that's very absent in the justice field, is spending money on programs that are proven to work and that are proven to address the specific population. That you can't just send everybody to a one-size-fits-all program. Right there in the blue striped shirt.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your story. My question is something of a data question.
I'll repeat the question.
We've seen great drops in juvenile arrests. We've seen great drops as a result of the number of cases that land in juvenile court.
So let me just repeat, the question is how we as judges are able to deal with the volume of cases that we see, and has there been any relief in the volume of cases over the years? Judge Martin, you want to take that?
So as I indicated when I first sat down, I'm the presiding judge of the Child Protection Division, not juvenile justice. But when I took over as presiding judge, I had 58,000 children in foster care. Today I have less than 6,000 children, and I say safely 6,000 because my numbers of recidivism haven't increased, okay? And I'm very proud of that number. But as soon as I went downtown to ask for more judges, they said, but Pat, your numbers are so low, why do you need more judges? And I said, because now I actually can do my work. Before I was just taking a breath and trying to get people out of the room so I could see and breathe. Now I can actually look at my cases and look at my families and look at the things that I need to do and take the time to involve the community. I spend a great deal of my time off the bench in the community trying to get community resources to support my families once I can get them back home and together. So I'm doing more work now. I think I'm more tired now than when I had 58, truly. Because when I had 58,000 kids in foster care, I would sit on the bench at 8:30 and I wouldn't take a break until 3:30 for a quick lunch because I had to give the court reporter a break. We'd get on the bench and I'd stay there till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. But I don't think I got much done. All I was doing is just shuffling paperwork. Today, I actually think I'm doing work. So, my answer is that numbers have gone down substantially, but now we're actually getting an opportunity to know our families and do the work that we need to do. We're actually having the opportunity to do training on implicit bias so we can talk about cultural issues. We're now having the opportunity, I just came from a meeting in Reno where we're talking about spreading the impact of cultural and implicit bias training to all the judges nationwide. So we're starting to do more, working more efficiently and working better now. That would be my answer.
Judge Beyer?
The phrase on sort of unpeeling the onion, the problem is not so much that there's less cases. The problem is they really become more and more complex the more we know. So if we understand now to look for trauma, if we understand to look for mental health, if we understand what we're going to do about homelessness, what type of counseling does a child need? If, in fact, I get a case that I have the time to ask all the right questions, I start unpeeling the onion, and it becomes, it's like eating a salad. You can't ever get to the end of it. I mean, it keeps getting bigger and bigger, not smaller and smaller. And so what that says is, in my jurisdiction, each of our family court judges get 2,000 new cases a year. That doesn't count the cases that come back. That's just new cases. So in a given day, I might work with 40 kids on a docket that's 5 hours or 6 hours long. You can't even begin to scrape you're filling in papers, you're filling in boxes, you're signing your name, and you're moving on because of the pressure of the people out there waiting for their case to be called. And so the real answer is to promote the efficiency in a way that puts the right judges in the right places that we've talked about. And, you know, I've often said poor and disenfranchised families don't have a very good lobby. And part of our job in the community is to get to our state capitals and insist that the reason children are dying, that the reason that we have babies incarcerated, I say babies, I mean my kids that I work with, is because we're not providing the type of, we keep drying up the services that need to serve these families. So it's a complicated answer, and it's not a straight line analysis of less cases now. You have more time.
So, and let me just add, in the beginning when I was a presiding judge, I was literally just trying to get through my call every day. As a presiding judge now, I have mandatory lunches with my judges once a month, and we do a training session. So I have a series with pediatricians. I have pediatrician orthopedists come into my judges' lunch with me, and we talk about broken bones. We talk about baseline fractures. We talk about the fact that a 2-year-old can't cruise, so if someone's coming in saying they fell off a bed, that's suspicious. We then go to burns, we go to bruises, we go to broken bones. We do the pediatricians, and the pediatricians also, when they're doing their peds rotation, spend a day in my court. So we're starting to expand our knowledge. And yes, I'm the first one to say I don't want my judges being social workers and doctors, but I do think they need a baseline knowledge of these disciplines so that when they hear the testimony, they have some context in which to put it. And so now I spend a great deal of time recruiting these training sessions for my judges. So that takes a lot of time. So these are the things we're doing. We're expanding our knowledge, and we're hopefully doing better and having better outcomes for our families.
And like Judge Martin was saying, you know, being experienced is real important because there is a huge learning curve. You have to learn all the resources in the community, plus you're learning about all these different areas that impact the juvenile court. One of the things that I emphasize is education, and I think I spend most of my time on the bench talking to the youth and their families about the education system to make sure that that young person is getting the best out of the education system, because I think education is the key to rehabilitation. Take a question right there.
Yes, 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 yes. So let me give you a story. I'm the presiding judge, and I don't have a regular call. I have about 10 cases that I follow, but because I'm doing work like this, I don't sit on the bench every single day. But the policy in my building is if a judge has a bunch of emergency motions and I'm in the building, I'll take those because I don't want families waiting, right? So first, how many people are lawyers in here? Well, I don't mean to insult you, but we know how lawyers are. Everything's an emergency when they want it to be an emergency. So first I have to decide if it's a real emergency or just a lawyer emergency, right? But this one day, they came in and said that a child got burned when she was on an unsupervised overnight weekend visit with her mother. Now, to me, that's serious. So I said, absolutely, I'll do that. I wish you could have been in my courtroom. Because what had happened was the child was getting ready to start a new semester in school, and the mother gave her a home perm. How many of you have ever had a perm and you didn't get burned, right? And so, I mean, I don't know if that's sensitivity, but what it is not a lack of respect. I mean, ask the mother what happened. Ask somebody before you and this girl's crying, thinking that I'm gonna take these visits away from her and her mom. And her mom's doing great. And I just can't imagine that type of trauma on top of all the garbage she has to go through daily. So those are the things. If I could just eliminate that garbage, I'd be a happy camper. But we have so many things going on that, you know, and I'm not trying to be critical of social workers, because everyone says Judge Martin doesn't like social workers because I try to hold them to the fire, you know, and I try to make them do their job. That's not true. I could never be a social worker. I really couldn't, because I couldn't keep all those balls in the air, really. I couldn't keep my attention diverted such that I could take care of all the kids, all the parents, and all that stuff at one time. But what I do think we need to do is we need to incorporate the fields of expertise that we have. So if in fact this social worker thought the mother intentionally burned the child's head, pick up the phone and call a beauty shop. Who would have thunk, right? If in fact the social worker is having difficulty understanding, you know, the cultural differences of a family that has a particular religious faith or a belief that you're not familiar with, pick up the phone and call somebody. I'm not saying that you have to believe everything someone tells you, but I am saying you have to take the initiative to try to find something, right? And so I would suggest that legislators look to some of the work that's already been done with ICWA. That's a perfect example of how our community, our society has looked at a particular culture, and whether you think ICWA's good, bad, or indifferent, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is looking at some of the ways the legislature has, and Congress has looked at a particular culture and started incorporating that in some of the legislation. And I think we can do that, and I think there are a multitude of opportunities for us, and I think we have to start.
I think in terms of training, that the most important training that I've had is to learn about institutional racism and how it impacts everything that we do in the juvenile justice system, and also learning that everybody in the courtroom, whether it's your staff, whether it's the parents, people are suffering from trauma, and we need to be sensitive to that. When a judge shakes his or her finger at somebody and yells at somebody, we're re-inflicting trauma. And so I think we need to be sensitized to the fact that people need to be spoken to with respect, and that you can't get the best out of anybody unless you're addressing them in a way that will get them to move forward. Gentleman in the back.
Thank you. I have a question. It seems like, thank you. It seems like in a few instances, there were some stories about maybe the social services people and the juvenile court people not being on the same page or not seeing eye to eye. And I'm not saying that 110% of the time that's what happens, but what do you think could be done policy-wise or administratively to correct that and to maybe get the two sides on the same page?
Judge Beyer, do you want to talk about your project?
Project 1 project?
Yes.
All right, so one of the things that courts do worst is communicate. And the next thing we do poorly is communicate between judges if we have one child in different courts, but with the same kind of problems. And so in my jurisdiction, unfortunately, the family court judges, we would hear cases of a child being abused and neglected, and if that child commits a status offense, and I say child, youth, runs away from home, doesn't go to school. The problem is if that young adult, that youth picks up a criminal offense, a public offense, they're in another building with another file, with another judge who doesn't have communication. Perfect example, we have a lot of what we call school abuse cases, abusive teacher cases. And so a child may lose their temper, and the first thing they do is they call the police, and the child's pulled out of school. And so the prosecutor has to make a decision about, because the unions we want to make sure our teachers are protected, this prosecutor has to make a decision, are we going to prosecute this child? That prosecutor in juvenile court in my jurisdiction does not know anything about this young child's history. If this child had been abused and neglected, if this child had witnessed domestic violence, if this child the night before had been sleeping on the street or on somebody's porch, or fill in the blank. And so through a project through the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges called Project 1, what we're doing is getting all of these people dealing with this one child to figure out a method that we can talk about this one child and not pass this child back like a thing, like a case. This is a child, this is a family. How do we make sure we don't keep repeating services? How do we make sure we put in place the most effective, culturally competent services? How do we make sure we're being respectful of the family and not sending them to court 9 different times to wait 58 different hours for a visit to say, we'll see you next time. And so the truth of the matter is, courts and other institutions function on papers and do what's convenient for the institutions. We have to relook at this as a consumer question, is how do we make this better?